The range was loud. Rounds cracked through dry air like whiplash. Targets exploded in dust. Instructors barked corrections through steel megaphones, but near the end of the firing line, a figure didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even raise a weapon. He sat alone on an ammo crate, arms crossed, eyes hidden beneath the brim of a sun-faded navy cap, just watching. Some recruits joked he was someone's grandfather who'd wandered too close to the line. Others thought he was a retired range officer too old to hold a clipboard. He didn't speak, he didn't even nod. But when recruit Carter stepped up to his lane, he caught something the others missed, a flash of ink under the rolled-up sleeve of the old man's flannel shirt, a tattoo, a trident, old, worn, and unmistakable. The round in Carter's chamber never fired, because in that instant he realized that man hadn't come to observe, he'd come to remember. Welcome to the Veteran's Voice. Before we continue, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe to Veteran's Voice. We share the untold moments that define true honor and quiet courage. The SEAL firing range wasn't made for comfort. The gravel bit through boots, the sun burned through tactical fabric. Every echo of gunfire bounced off steel backstops like thunder in a canyon. Recruits lined up in formation, rifles slung across their chests, shoulders squared. Precision, aggression, discipline. Every inch of ground here demanded it. Carter had been on edge all week, not because of the heat or the drills, but because this was the phase where instructors stopped correcting you gently. Every mistake here was judged in decibels and speed. He'd seen 2 recruits dropped already, one for hesitating, the other for flinching. And now they were watching him. Every movement, every breath. His mind had been trained to focus on the range, the weapon, the rhythm of breath and trigger squeeze. But then he noticed him. At the far edge of the gravel pad, beyond the designated lines, a single man sat on an old ammo crate. He wore no badge, no patch, no rank, just a battered flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, light blue jeans worn pale at the knees, and a pair of brown boots cracked at the toes. His face was cut from stone-deep lines, eyes hidden under a sweat-stained navy blue ball cap, the kind old men wore when they didn't want to talk about the war but never stopped thinking about it. The instructors never addressed him, never looked his way. He just sat there, still as a sandbag, watching every recruit that stepped into firing position. Carter had seen observers before, high ranks in sunglasses, government men with quiet notebooks, but this one felt different. He didn't observe like someone gathering data. He observed like someone remembering exactly what it felt like. And something about that unsettled Carter more than any drill sergeant's shout. Carter reset his stance, boots firmly planted in the gravel of the SEAL firing range, rifle slung low, ears still ringing from the last volley. The sun hammered down on the metal structures, and the air smelled like gunpowder, dust, and sweat, but the heat wasn't what made him uncomfortable. It was that man, the old one. He hadn't moved since Carter first spotted him, still sitting on that crate, elbows on knees, silver thermos hanging loosely from one hand. His cap shadowed most of his face, but there was no mistaking the intensity of his stare. Carter had caught glimpses of base observers before, instructors evaluating silently, senior officers looking for weaknesses, but this man wasn't taking notes, he wasn't analyzing, he was remembering. That alone made him feel exposed. Carter tried to shake it off. He chambered another round, adjusted his footing, and fired. Clean shot. The steel plate in the distance rang out. Another and another. But between every burst his eyes flicked back toward the edge of the line. The man still hadn't moved. On break, Carter walked over to the ammo crates to refill his magazines. He could hear the others talking, low chatter between grunts and curse words, the kind of small talk recruits used to pretend nothing was hard, but even they had noticed him now. One whispered, "Who's that guy by the fence?" Another replied, "Probably someone's granddad. He hasn't blinked since we got here." Carter didn't join in because he had seen something the others hadn't. It had happened a few minutes earlier, just as the man stood and slowly stretched his back. The movement had been subtle, natural, like someone adjusting their sleeve out of habit. But in that motion, the cuff of his flannel shirt slid back just enough to reveal a mark. Just a glimpse, but it was enough. A tattoo, old, faded, partially blurred by decades of sun and skin. But Carter recognized it instantly. The SEAL trident, not the stylized modern versions he'd seen on Instagram or stitched onto jackets at the PX. This was different. The lines were sharper, more precise in design, but dulled with time. Not from laziness or inkware, but from life, from combat, from history. The eagle, the trident, the anchor, the flintlock, all there, burned into a man who didn't need to say a word about it. Carter's pulse had quickened. That symbol wasn't something you got for making it through Bud S. It was something you earned in places no cameras ever reached. Carter had studied the history, the early teams, the missions denied and redacted, the legends who walked off choppers and disappeared into the jungle or mountains or ocean with nothing but silence behind them. And now one of them was standing 20 feet away, holding a thermos, watching him shoot. The next time Carter stepped the line, he couldn't look away. He tried to reset his breathing front sight, focus, but his hands felt different, not shaky, just aware. Aware that someone was watching him who didn't care about his time, his scores, or his instructor's clipboard. Someone who had done it for real, in silence, with no one clapping when it was over. It was humbling in a way Carter hadn't expected. He didn't tell the others. He didn't point. He didn't want to, because somehow he knew this wasn't a story to share. It was a presence to carry. And that presence was watching him now, every shot, every breath, as if to say, show me who you are. Not with words, not with noise, with action. It wasn't part of the schedule. It wasn't part of the drill. And it wasn't something recruits were supposed to do, but Carter moved anyway. The instructors had just called a rotation. Time to shift positions, reload, hydrate. The other recruits dispersed in tight groups, heading toward the gear benches, still half laughing, half grimacing, but Carter didn't follow them. His feet turned sideways, almost on their own, toward the edge of the range, toward the old man. He walked slowly, unsure why he was even doing it. Every step felt like it was cutting across a line that had been drawn but was still there. Not a rule, something older, the kind of boundary respected not out of fear, but out of reverence. The man hadn't moved, still seated on that crate, hands resting loosely on his knees, thermos cradled in his right palm. But as Carter approached, the old man looked up, just slightly. Their eyes met, and in that second, Carter felt everything slow. Not because of fear, not even intimidation, but because there was weight behind that gaze. A stillness that came only from having carried something heavy for a very long time. The kind of look that told you he didn't care who you were or what rank you might hold someday. He'd already seen men far louder die much more quietly. Carter stopped just a few feet away. He didn't speak. He didn't salute. He didn't know what gesture was even appropriate. He just stood there. Then, without really thinking, he looked down at the man's arm, at the tattoo that had caught his eye earlier, and this time, the man didn't shift his sleeve. He simply turned his arm slightly, resting it across his knee, forearm outward, like it had always been meant to be seen. Carter crouched, not to kneel, not to worship, just to see. Up close, the ink was older than Carter had imagined. The lines weren't crisp anymore, but they didn't need to be. The design was clear. The seal trident in full eagle anchor, flintlock hand, trident weathered and proud. It wasn't just a tattoo. It was a story carved into skin, one that needed no embellishment. There were scars around it, faint but present, and Carter didn't need to ask how they got there. He didn't reach out, but he stared quietly, with the reverence of someone looking not at art but at proof. He finally looked up. The man hadn't said a word, but his eyes, sharp even behind that lined skin, had softened, just a fraction, enough to say, "You see it now." Carter nodded, not to gain approval, but to acknowledge something far more important. And then the veteran did something unexpected. He lifted the thermos slightly, raised it toward Carter, and held it out, not as an offering but as a gesture, a passing of something invisible. Carter accepted it lightly. He didn't open it. He didn't look inside. He just held it for a moment as the man stood, bones creaking, but posture upright. They stood face to face. A boy who was trying to become a warrior and a man who had long ago stopped needing the title. And then the old man turned, walked away down the gravel path behind the firing sheds, and disappeared into the glare of the sun. No name, no salute, no speech, just silence and a presence that stayed behind long after his shadow was gone. Carter didn't move for a while. He stood alone, thermos still in hand, watching the trail of dust settle where the old man had walked away. The other recruits were already gathering again, instructors calling them back to formation with clipped orders and steel voices, but none of it seemed loud anymore. Not after that. Eventually, Carter turned and made his way back to the line, walking slower than usual. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't try to explain. What could he say? When he returned to his gear, he placed the thermos gently beside his rifle. It was warm to the touch, but he didn't open it. He didn't need to. The gesture had meant something beyond the object. It wasn't about coffee. It wasn't about thirst. It was about trust, transmission. Something unspoken passed between generations, one sip at a time. During the next round of firing, Carter was different. Not faster, not louder, just steadier. Every shot was deliberate, every movement cleaner. His breathing synced with the rhythm of the recoil. He didn't check who was watching anymore. He already knew who had. Instructors noticed. One of them, a chief who rarely gave out more than a grunt, stopped beside Carter after his round. He didn't say anything for several seconds, just stood there, arms crossed, eyes flicking from the target to the recruit. Then he asked quietly, "You talked to him?" Carter nodded once. The chief didn't ask what was said. He just gave a half smile, rare, quiet, and completely sincere. Then he walked away. That night, Carter sat at the edge of the barracks while the others played cards or messaged home. He pulled out a notebook he had used since prep school and wrote just one sentence across the top of the page. Some men leave behind medals, others leave behind silence, but the rarest leave behind both and need neither to be remembered. The next Thursday, Carter looked for him. He arrived early, stood by the range entrance before roll call, scanned the line of crates and benches by the fence. Nothing. The instructors carried on like always. The drills resumed, but the crates stayed empty. A week passed, then another. Carter never saw the man again. But sometimes, during drills, in the quiet between rounds, he could still feel it. That gaze, not judgmental, not proud, just watching. Some legends don't need a name. They don't walk with medals on their chest or speak in long speeches. They just show up quietly and let their silence speak louder than any war story ever could. That old man at the SEAL firing range didn't come to correct anyone. He came to remember, and in doing so, he became the standard. There's a kind of presence that doesn't demand attention. It earns it slowly, silently, permanently. And sometimes all it takes is a faded tattoo to remind you that you're re-standing in the footsteps of giants. Have you ever met someone like that? Someone who never bragged, never spoke about what they'd done, but whose silence carried more weight than a room full of voices? Say their name in the comments. Let their legacy be seen. Subscribe to the Veteran's Voice to help us keep sharing the quiet heroes that shaped us. And remember, if you ever feel someone watching you during training, don't panic. It might just be someone making sure you're worthy of the path you're walking. Thank you for watching.